and now we're going to networks of cities. We have Lauren Sorkin. So we're going from one city to many cities. Lauren, who's the executive director of the Global Resilient Cities Network, is going to talk about how all these cities are connected and how they can learn from each other. Lauren, on to you.
Imagine that you are the mayor of a city of 5 million people. Your city is growing at between 7 and 9% a year. You barely have enough funding and enough city staff to keep the city systems and infrastructure moving. You're headed into a devastating monsoon season where rains could shut down your formal and informal transport network and bring the industry to a halt. This isn't a hypothetical story. This is the story of Surat in India, one of the fastest growing cities not only in India and Asia Pacific, but in the world. Last year, the city of Surat reached out through its membership in the Global Resilient Cities Network to us, and we connected them with the city of Rotterdam. Rotterdam shared with the city of Surat how they, for decades, have been building water plazas within their city, where people can gather and recreate in good times. And in times of heavy rain and flooding, those same water plazas fill up and are flooded, and they become beautiful reservoirs. Instead of being a danger, floods become a place for people to also look at their city, but from the outside. In times of trouble, it's our networks that sustain us. It's when we look to others that we find solutions to our problems and we realize that we are more alike than we are different. This, at its core, is the work of the Global Resilient Cities Network. So let me tell you a little bit more about what we do. The Global Resilient Cities Network helps cities around the world become more resilient to the physical, social, and economic challenges that they face. We are city-led, we are impact-focused, and we work with partners to deliver results in cities around the world. We work in 47 different countries and in 21 different languages. Our network is the product of over 10 years of investment in resilience from the Rockefeller Foundation, and builds on the foundation of the 100 Resilient Cities program, which operated from 2013 to 2019 and innovated the way we think about building resilience in cities. Our organization is comprised of former leaders of 100 Resilient Cities based in London, Singapore, Mexico, and New York. So what is resilience? It's important to understand resilience the way we work on it within Global Resilient Cities Network. We have a common definition that is bold and is broad. We view resilience as the capacity of individuals, communities, institutions, businesses, and systems to survive, adapt, and grow no matter what kind of shock or stress they might be experiencing. Now, when we talk about stresses, we're talking about those issues that might not happen suddenly in a day, but that are slowly burning below the surface. And they're making it more and more difficult for our cities to grow and to be prepared for the future. They include such global challenges as climate change or very specific challenges to certain geographies and countries like systemic racism. It could be chronic food and water shortage or an aging population. We also deal with acute shocks, which are those sharp events that threaten a city: an earthquake, a flood, a terrorist attack, or a pandemic. Now, what is the opportunity that we work on within the Global Resilient Cities Network? We have, over the course of the last 6 years, built an institutional innovation that allows us to channel solutions to cities on a large scale. Across our network of 100 cities, we have chief resilience officers. These chief resilience officers work as a single point of contact in their cities to look across the cities, across sectors, break down silos, and look at the opportunities and challenges for their cities. They are a top-level advisor to the mayor or governor or city commissioner in their cities, and they coordinate all resilience building efforts. These chief resilience officers have also spent time developing resilience strategies. These resilience strategies have been led by chief resilience officers, endorsed by city leadership, and have taken a holistic view at the city's challenges and opportunities and prioritized those initiatives that are going to propel that city into the future and make them stronger and more resilient to the challenges they face. These cities represent 220 million people worldwide, and they represent city budgets of over $350 billion. These cities are invested for the long term. In the words of Lenio Mervilla, our chief resilience officer from Athens, cities are invested for the long term. We cannot not deliver. Now, when we say cities are more alike than they are different, what are we actually talking about? Cities are systems, and they're facing certain shocks and stresses that are common. The most common is rainfall, flooding, and infrastructure failure when we look at our shocks, those things that are happening suddenly. And this will come as no surprise to many of you, when we look at stresses, we look at economic inequality, lack of affordable housing, and inadequate infrastructure like public transportation, excuse me. Now, our cities share that common lens of holistic resilience. This is important because when they're confronting these shocks and stresses, they're not looking at them alone. They're looking at them as part of a system and how they can design solutions that will deliver multiple benefits. This group has a shared vision to create together scalable programs and investments that really work to benefit vulnerable communities and that enhance critical infrastructure systems that serve all citizens in cities. Now, when we look at our cities, what we see is a very exciting potential because we have different groups of cities. Some of them in some of these areas are coping champions. For example, Rotterdam with its flood plazas. Some of our cities are ready to pilot these new innovations. We call those our proving ground cities. And then we have cities, many of them, who are highly vulnerable, who are growing very fast, and who are in need of additional technical assistance and funding in order to scale those solutions and really leap forward in their resilience building efforts. Many of these cities in our network are located in Africa and India. Now, with the onset of COVID-19, we have never had a more profound and universal resilience challenge. So our cities came to us and asked for support. We found through surveys that 89% of our chief resilience officers are either deployed to response or recovery efforts. The minority of those CROs are very focused on individual city efforts like testing or food supply. The majority of chief resilience officers are actually tasked with what does that new normal look like? What is a resilient recovery? And therein lies an enormous opportunity. So we've created a program, C2R, or Cities for a Resilient Recovery, that empowers cities to rise from COVID-19 as thriving and future ready, backed by knowledge, networks, and investments that measurably strengthen them. Through our network, we are providing real-time global communication where cities have a safe space to ask each other for advice and policy solutions that they're able to deploy in real time. We also convene a weekly speaker series on COVID-19, and last night's session actually looked at resilient food systems. We've also expanded our global database that looks at those shocks and stresses to identify the areas that are going to be even more important now that we're in a period of stimulus and potential for transformation as we recover from COVID-19. And we're creating within our network these action cohorts that help to respond in specific areas. Now, as we transition to recovery, this is the resilience opportunity of our generation. We are able to look through a resilience lens at what are those underlying shocks and stresses that made COVID-19 unfold in a certain way in a certain city? What are those cascading effects that we've experienced? What do we know about the kind of city that we want to build proactively? And then that allows us to plan for better projects and better outcomes. Now, knowing that this group has a particular interest in the food space, this is an example of just one of the areas that we work in, which is food systems and resilient food systems. And this shows a basic mapping from within our network of which cities are focused on food resilience and what kinds of projects and programs these cities need in order to build back better. We see that 41% of cities who have completed their resilience strategies have identified food systems as an area for investment. And you can see here within the spectrum, some of these are looking at equity in food, some of these are looking at how do we preserve the environment or invest in sustainable food solutions, and others are actually looking at circular economy. So there are a lot of complementarities here with the agenda for this network. And finally, just one example. So in the city of Chennai, the city also, like Surat, though they're very far apart geographically, also deals with inconsistent monsoon rains. And unfortunately, also has many children who are not able to access healthy food on a regular basis and who count on their schools to provide them with nutritious midday meals. Now, as part of the Chennai Resilience Strategy, we identified urban agriculture as one of the potential ways to solve for capturing rainwater, providing healthy food, and also educating children about their food systems and the importance of cultivating organic and healthy food. And so out of that, the Chennai Urban Horticulture and Rooftop Gardening Initiative was born. And this initiative utilizes thousands of acres of rooftop gardens on city schools. City schools are an asset that cities have control over. So they're able to make this change fairly rapidly. They're also able to involve their local communities. So in 200 different schools, the community welfare associations are coming together to help to maintain these gardens and provide the vegetables from them to the nutritious midday meals program in Tamil Nadu. And then finally, it creates an opportunity to bring citizens together to educate them about the benefits of this rooftop gardening for their own personal health and nutrition, for the environment, for the community. So here we see all of these benefits, these co-benefits, that when we take a holistic resilience approach, we're able to map, we're able to quantify, we're able to realize. And with that, I just want to say thanks. I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Lauren, that was amazing, and it's so good to hear from you, and thank you for the great work that you do. If there's one project you would like to throw to this group of delegates to take forward and do something with, what would it be?
If I had to pick a theme, I would say we really need to accelerate projects that are strengthening local economy and that are meeting climate challenges and health challenges in a post-COVID environment. And I would say that that is extremely relevant for all of our cities, but the cities who really need the most help are those fast-growing secondary cities. And sitting in Southeast Asia, there are many of them. In our network, the city of Semarang is one that comes to mind that we work very closely with, but it's by no means the only city. And these cities are well organized, but they're not always well resourced. And these cities really can use this kind of a network, right, of innovators, of technologists, of financiers to come in and work with a government who has aligned around what they want and has aligned around a resilient strategy and an agenda, and take innovative projects forward, and also break down this assumption that it's only the New Yorks or the Shanghais that can innovate and that can afford to innovate. That's just simply not true. We know that we have secondary cities in emerging markets who are ready, and it's there that we have the highest potential to have impact, because that's where the growth is, right? That's where cities are growing the fastest, in these secondary cities and emerging markets.
You've done, again, an incredible job with systemizing everything, like taking a very systematic approach to all this. You've taken a great approach to language and getting everyone to understand the language that you use around resilience, so there's a common understanding of all of this. Where would you take that? Is the knowledge captured in one place? How are you extending the knowledge beyond the 47 countries you work with?
So with our network, we have a pretty simple but strict approach to what we do. When we work with cities, as you mentioned, we all adhere to the same definition of resilience, right? We have to take that same bold and broad language, and then we have to ground it. So in management speak, you say, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. In the transformation space, and in particular in this kind of network and resilience space, if you can't articulate it, you can't action it. So we work very closely with our cities to define those metrics, and ultimately our cities measure those and then share them with us, right? Because these are metrics that chief resilience officers are responsible for reporting on. And so, for example, with COVID-19, we saw our chief resilience officer from Oakland was deployed to the Emergency Operations Center in her city. And she ran the city's first community resilience center within that Emergency Operations Center. Now, what did that mean? It meant that when the community, including the private sector, including individual donors, pooled together very quickly $4 million for an Oakland relief fund, that her office was able to advise on which of the specific minority-owned businesses really needed those funds and deploy them in a directional way, so that those entrepreneurs of color, those women entrepreneurs, they would be on the priority list. and that they would receive funding sooner. So those are the statistics that our chief resilience officers collect, and then we collect them for the cities globally. If this is a project based on cities, then the sooner cities are involved, the better. Like a resilience strategy looks at the outcomes you want at a city level, and then you deliver along those outcomes, right? So every project that's designed for resilience strategy is outcome oriented, right? So we have to be able to articulate what we're trying to do with this resilience work, and that we are working on cities as systems, and that we are working on this at various levels of engagement, right? So we have to work on it with communities, we have to work on it with the public sector, and we have to work on it with the private sector, right? So we have to get those multiple actors involved, because they all have a role to play, and they have to make sure that the solutions are going to be designed for them. So that's a very specific way that we adhere to that same approach with the network and what we do.
What's next? Where do you want to go with this?
Thanks, Alicia. That's a great question. So it's all about creating collective action at this point. So within those 4,300 projects, there are clusters, right? There are these action areas where cities want to work together. So what we're looking for are partners in financing these clusters, innovators who want to come in and bring in best practices and support cities to do this work. We are able to provide an architecture, right? And we're able to provide a foundation of cities with strategies, with chief resilience officers who understand how to get these projects done in cities. And they are creating a platform to really scale innovation. So we're looking at a couple of different thematic areas. I mentioned food systems, another one is circular economy. We're also looking very closely at climate change adaptation, including water resilience and also urban heat. And then we are also looking with some new partners on energy transition and some other issues around digital transformation, digital economy.
Lauren, thank you so much. That was an amazing showcasing of the great work you've been doing.